Okay, we are going to follow with Team 2, who's going to share with us a project around Southeast Michigan climate plans and energy equity analysis and implementation in partnership with Elevate. You're good. Come on up, Team 2.
Eager to go.
Didn't realize she was still talking.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you, Jen, for that great introduction. We're Team 2, and we were looking at Southeast Michigan climate plans and energy equity analysis implementation. Our partner was Elevate Energy. A little bit more about our team. So we have Yor, who's a dual with C's and Ford. We have Kiki, who's a Master of Public Health student in Nutritional Sciences. We have Sonia, who's a dual between C's and Urban Planning. And then myself, who's a dual between C's and Business. So our project partner, Elevate, they're a nonprofit focused on climate and energy equity. And one thing that really stood out to us when we were working with Elevate is the really strong partnerships that they have with their local community. It is really unparalleled. And the sustainability challenge that they came to us with was trying to find a central resource of best practices to create, implement climate resilience plans at the county level as well as the municipal level. So how do we go about doing this? Our project, I would say, had two phases. So the first phase was really identifying current cities and current counties that actually had climate plans, creating benchmarks to actually evaluate these plans to figure out, okay, which ones actually had best practices, do a comparative policy analysis, and then try and synthesize these findings from a very scary Excel sheet into a more digestible one-pager that could be distributed to Elevate's partners. The second phase of our project was on the Resilient Eastside Initiative in Eastern Detroit. So we wanted to identify climate emergencies that were relevant to the resilience hubs that were currently operating on the east side. And what we really wanted to do was connect with these local hubs to really understand local indicators that could help inform our definitions, and then create an intuitive flowchart for the resilience hubs to use to understand when a climate emergency is happening and when they should activate their hubs resources for their community, and as well as look at other resilience hubs that were happening.
Yeah, so kind of going off that, we had two main deliverables that came out of that process. Our first one is an analysis of the climate and resilience plans in Southeast Michigan. So like what was said before, there were a bunch of climate plans, and we kind of went through them and took apart things that we think like areas where they needed help and like had specific needs that Elevate could get involved in. And then also a big thing of like how we got to this deliverable was Elevate wanted to make sure that work wasn't being duplicated because it's a pretty small area and everyone had their own plan, and Elevate also does its own work. So we wanted to make sure we were like highlighting what work is being done and how Elevate can get involved without duplicating work. And then our second main deliverable, which was part of phase 2, was to make a definition for climate emergencies. So kind of what was said before, a bunch of climate emergencies that are happening in the city are not fully like defined, meaning if there's like a certain temperature of like when it would become like specific like a heat wave, that's not defined fully, or there's no universal definition. So working to define that in order to figure out the resilience hubs that are like within the city, when they can kick in for climate emergencies and how that definition changes depending on vulnerability. So like for me, a specific temperature wouldn't be as concerning as someone with different vulnerabilities. So taking that into consideration as well. So for the first deliverable, this was the benchmarking that we took into consideration when looking at the plans. There was 8 different categories, and we read each plan in reference to all 8 of these. And then within 8 of them, they were like specific parts, like within community resilience building, we looked at various aspects. So this was just an expansion of the deliverables and kind of what was said before, like working to put a lot of like our brain dumps and research from the Excel sheet into an actual one-pager that is more digestible for people within who like actually wrote the plan, people that would be working on the plan, and then Elevate and their partners. And
I can take this one.
yeah, that's you.
So shifting over to our second phase with the climate emergencies, we decided to look at 4. So extreme heat, like Sonia mentioned, flooding, winter storms, as well as air quality, and then an underlying Underlying thing across three of those was power outages, as they are especially prevalent in the Detroit area, especially when extreme heat or storms kick in. Oftentimes, a lot of folks on the east side end up losing power. So what did we actually create? There's a lot going on this page here, but for every single emergency, we created this sort of flow chart that had different functions for warnings, monitoring, emergencies, and when actual activation should occur. So as you can see, this is an example for winter storms. So a winter storm advisory, freezing rain or 2 to 4 inches of snow, and what a certain resilience hub in the east side should be doing. If they should monitor, if they should reach out to those vulnerable communities, such as the elderly or people that are medication dependent and might lose power, understanding that this is what a hub should be doing. They should be reaching out and saying, do you need extra care? Do you need a stay or go kit if a winter storm hits? And really just having this process there for hubs to refer to if they notice that a winter storm may be incoming. Another deliverable that we created as part of the Resilient East Side, you created a fantastic map in GIS, just really mapping out where all of the resilience hubs are. So the purpose of the REI initiative is that it really is meant to be a network. So a big thing here was just really mapping out where all of the hubs that are part of the network are, just so that if a member of the community does reach out in need, other hubs can look at the map and understand which partner hub is the closest to that individual so that they have somewhere they can go, as many of these folks do not have transportation of their own. So this was an important first step that really highlights the interdisciplinary and communicative nature of the hub.
Going to our impacts of our project, I think the two main things that we wanted to focus on and that we think the impact is to first, in reference to our first deliverable, is making sure that we've gone through the strategies and we're kind of helping the municipalities and Elevate develop more effective strategies that aren't duplicating the work and figuring out where need is. And then the second one is a definition on various climate emergencies and where resilience hubs can kick in. And these directly are interconnected with the sustainability UN goals, specifically number 3, 7, 10, 13, and 17. I think a big thing is that through our work, we realize that everything is kind of very interconnected, which is what makes sustainability interesting. But we started, I think a lot of our deliverables kind of just came about through our process, and they kind of ended up connecting a lot with the UN goals. And then a big thing we were talking about at the end of this project is this was kind of a very much a first step, and there's so much more work that needs to be done, and it was a really cool process to kind of work with REI and Elevate in this foundational step. So we were thinking if this project was continued and if other work was to be done, I think it would be really cool to work on the map more, specifically layering with the services that we talked about in relation to the definition or new services that are coming. And then also a big thing was it was really cool to be able to actually interact with the hubs, but there's so much more need there, and this was a very beginning foundational step project, so deeper engagement with the hubs to make sure that there's actually communication with stuff that they need and the opportunities, because the people running the hubs are the ones that have all the knowledge, and it's more us just listening about what they need. And then also just expanding our emergency framework. It's a very foundational preliminary definition, and yeah.
Yeah, so obviously a lot of people to thank to make this project come together over the last year. First, Elevate, Liz, Terry, I know you're here. We really could not have done this without you, as well as with Hank. On the Eastside Community Network, Megan Richards, Ricky Ackerman, and Aaron Stanley were also incredible with letting us really come in and present at some of their REI roundtables that they hosted monthly with the hubs. So that was an incredible experience for us to sit in on, as well as the Resilient Eastside Initiative hubs. We did get to interview and connect with a lot of the hubs directly, and these are just a few of the folks here that we were able to connect with, which was really incredibly moving for us. And as well, the Dow Company Foundation. We couldn't have done this work without you. So thank you. Now we'll take any of your questions.
Okay, questions? Sorry.
Not all at once.
Really interesting project, great presentation, thank you. Thinking about the possibilities for scaling this to other communities, other parts of the state, I was wondering, whether you came up against any concern about defining the triggering events as climate emergencies. In other words, in some places, they don't like to talk about climate change. Resilience works, but do you have any thoughts about what might be involved in trying to expand it beyond those who are willing to say that climate is the cause of these emergencies?
So I will say with the Resilient Eastside Initiative, we didn't face any issues or pushback with that sort of language. I, again, could see how that could be an issue if you were to scale it up. One thing I would say from our conversations is that these are a lot of folks' lived experiences when it comes to facing a climate emergency. So I think building that connection, that receiving or like having a flood and not being able to cool your medication, having asthma or like really poor air quality, I think trying to maybe extract climate terms and put it in terms that can connect with everyday people would be an impactful strategy. I could see like a reframing of our definitions to not necessarily use the word climate emergency, but just say a emergency definition or just a tool to use if you are experiencing adverse reactions to the air quality. So I could see it being scaled up in that sense. Yeah,
Also, one more thing, when we were focusing on our definition and like the one pager, we were really focusing on making the language digestible for people not in very academic settings, because a lot of the information on definitions specifically are like super scientific. So I think a big thing was just making it more digestible for someone who like deals with this stuff every day, and that's definitely in connection to removing like climate change or climate like language, like specifically just saying natural disasters, because like it's very much lived experience, like. Yeah.
Awesome presentation, really exciting work you guys are doing. I'm curious, when establishing these definitions for these events, obviously, apologies, flooding levels affect different neighborhoods differently, and the threshold at which you lose power. I saw you had like a note for snowfall, and that also like changes depending on how close you are to like newer infrastructure from DTE. So how do you accommodate for that nuance in your definitions?
I think that was one of the things we wanted to focus on for future considerations. I think that the really exciting thing about creating definitions is that it like has a foundation, but it's also important to note that they're really place-based and specific. So I think if we had like much more time, it would be really helpful to create like specific place-based definitions depending on vulnerability of location, like if you're living on a floodplain, et cetera. We kind of tried to do that in reference to the deliverable, like specifically a different activation or definition depending on vulnerability. And then we could, like, vulnerability could be defined by like location and where you live, and how much like snowfall or rain you would achieve. But that's a super good point of like a next step that is really important.
Yeah, and one thing I would add is in our interviews with the hubs, we did try to dive a little deeper and see if they did have any additional local indicators that could help inform our definitions. I think one thing that we learned that was incredibly shocking was that the weather that is used to predict weather in Detroit is actually from Romulus. It's not actually in Detroit. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done just to even have accurate data to inform some of these emergency frameworks. So just a piece there that we learned, which is why we did add in future considerations, trying to strengthen that data to really make sure that they are accurately reflecting the places and the people that we're trying to help.
Also, one more thing that was really cool, just to go off that really quick, is like when we talked to the hub leaders, most of the people were individually reaching out to vulnerable communities. Like it was a lot of like local knowledge, like, oh, I know the family over there, like doesn't have a car or stuff like that. So it was like very much specific, like personal knowledge. And that would also be really cool to like get into more information so other people could access that.
Terry and I are the clients here, and we just wanted to say a big thank you to the team. They did a fantastic job this year, and it was wonderful to be working with them across the whole year, and we're really excited to at the possibility of working with another team next year. So thank you all for all your hard work.